Hello and welcome to the first broadcast of a new Sputnik radio programme called The Bridge. I'm John Harrison. This programme is all about trying to get to the bottom of vital issues which are currently affecting our lives, actions and futures. Now, it's perhaps a sign of the very troubled times that we live in that Britain is not only debating leaving the EU but holding a referendum on the subject this coming June. Now, this is after 40 years of being a part of a Europe that has changed almost beyond recognition since 1973 when the UK joined. There seems to be a danger, at least it seems to me, that we Brits are distracted by the wider situation in the world with the migrant crisis, with the fixation and demonisation of Russia, with financial destabilisation, which we blame China for. And we may sleepwalk into doing something that we might regret. Or perhaps it's right. If the UK votes to leave the EU, our lives will be fundamentally changed. This is probably the biggest turnaround to occur for UK citizens in our lifetimes. Or is it? What exactly will happen to the UK if it leaves? Does anybody know? I'm joined by Pippa, the leader of the Green Party in Wales, and Przemek. Sorry, Przemek, I apologise. It's not live. I'm going to try again, okay? Przemek Skrzynski, who is a researcher for Vote Leave, which is an organisation set up to campaign for the UK to leave the EU. Thank you very much.
Can I just interject you there?
Yeah.
I am a voluntary researcher. Just want to stress. So
okay.
I'm not representing Vote Leave. I just contribute to the research.
Okay, I shall put you in voluntary then. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine.
Yes,
I won't do it now because
I sit the committee. I sit on the committee of Polish Conservatives, and that's my main political kind of role.
Right.
So to speak at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you, for joining the programme. You're supposed to say something like "great" or something. Okay, so open question. Now, what is going to happen to the UK's economy if this goes through, if we wake up on the 24th of June and suddenly we find we are no longer members of the EU? I'm not saying things are going to change in one night, but what will happen to the UK over the following 6 months to year? Pippa, perhaps you'd like to start out on that very broad subject.
Yeah, very happy to. The first thing I would say is that businesses hate uncertainty. And nobody's put a strategy on the table to show what would happen once we have left, and the order in which things will be done, and an analysis of the threats, the weaknesses, and the opportunities. So there is a dearth of information. We can be sure that we're going to get a lot of hot air and half-formed opinion, but the one thing we aren't sure of is exactly what will happen because nothing has been modelled. Your first question revolves around the pound, which is not the be-all and end-all. I mean, the city manages to escape most EU regulation, and I'll say, for example, the financial transaction tax, which is across Europe, but it's certainly not here. Yeah. We have to worry that whenever there is uncertainty, businesses stop their strategies and do a lot of, shall we say, firefighting strategies because they don't know which way anything is going to fall. I've been in business a lot myself, and I understand this completely. Mm-hmm. We also know that the stock market hates uncertainty, and in the first 6 months, which is the scenario you've stretched out, it will more than likely drop. Yeah. Whether it recovers again will depend on the strategy in place for mitigating damage to industries, particularly ones who have used the UK as a jumping off point for a market in Europe.
Right. And it would also depend, I suppose, on the model that the UK takes. You know, if it takes the Norwegian model where Norway pays £263 million a year, I believe, to be a part of the European Economic Area, that means it can still trade freely with EU countries, but it cannot and does not take part in any decision-making processes within the EU. I mean, if that was to be the situation, then presumably Britain's trade with the EU would not change greatly.
Well, I think it might, funnily enough. We'll be working on ramping up other markets. And of course, Europe is our greatest market. More than 50% of our exports go to European countries. And that's not to be sneezed at. That doesn't mean those people will no longer buy from us, but it will mean uncertainty in regulations and rules, and it will mean that we will have no say over what future regulations or rules might be, as Norway has already freely admitted. So if you want to trade with Europe, you've still got to play by the rules. You just don't get to make them.
Yeah, Przemek, now you're a Pole living in London who's basically naturalised, I believe, but I'm sure you have an interesting perspective. I mean, how would other European countries view the UK if it leaves? Do you suspect, as I do, that there may be a little bit of sort of, well, you walked out. Why should we play with you? Why should we trade with you now when you've officially left the EU?
Well, the way I see this panning out, I mean, I don't think there will be much uncertainty really, because we as a country are most likely to go for the EEA model. So obviously joining the European Economic Area will make most sense. Out of European countries who are in, say, EFTA, you've only got Switzerland, who also doesn't form part of the EEA. Mm-hmm. You already mentioned the Norwegian model. I mean, going for that would probably alleviate the uncertainty. So in terms of businesses, businesses don't really have anything to worry about. And just going back on what Pippa said about the fact that businesses don't like uncertainty, I think in terms of the kind of Euro enthusiasm shown by the businesses, which a lot of the media kind of latched onto, it's mainly that the businesses quoted are typically big corporates, big multinationals. Mm-hmm. The reason why they like the EU so much is because what they can do, because they operate across different countries, and for that reason, being the EU, there are different tax regimes in different countries. So that's why you've got cases such as, say, Google or other big companies which basically domicile themselves for European purposes in really low tax jurisdictions, hence paying minimal tax whilst keeping operations in places with higher tax.
So then the UK would be the UK then would be a tax haven for companies that don't want to pay very much tax.
Well, no, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that at the moment that the big multinationals can, for example, pay tax in Ireland whilst operating in the UK, or maybe even pay tax in Luxembourg, right? But my point is that a lot of the smaller businesses actually look forward to leaving the EU for the reason that the EU comes with a lot of bureaucracy which could be avoided otherwise. And this is the reason why actually a lot of small businesses are for getting out. Now, in terms of other countries, because that was your question, how would the other countries perceive the UK leaving? Well, like I said, I think we would most likely stay within the EEA. Now, staying within the EEA basically guarantees, the four main principles of free movement, right? Which is the movement of capital, services, goods, and people, right? So that pretty much doesn't really change anything that much.
Well, I mean, I think it will do, though. I think it will change, because if we're talking about leaving the EU, we're also talking about Schengen. We're also talking about leaving the Schengen Agreement, which is the agreement that guarantees free movement of workers, of people, of staff, of experts around the EU. Now, I don't understand how you can say that nothing's going to change in that respect.
Well, in fact, the EEA guarantees free movement of people. So, if you, for example, look at the if you look at where the big Polish migrant communities have sprung up after 2004. Well, actually, if you look across Europe, not just the EU, there's a huge community in Norway. And, obviously, if Norway being outside the EU, however, part of the EEA was so obstructive, there wouldn't be a big community there.
Yeah. Pippa, do you agree with that nothing will change as far as movement to Labour goes if the UK leaves the EU?
Well, of course it will change. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the problems that has come to the fore of late is the refugee crisis, and this has made people. It has confused people between refugees and migrants. Free movement across the EU has been fantastic for all countries. Interchange of expertise, the type of scientific and technological breakthroughs that we've made by joining together, and the fact that, of course, we have about 2 million British citizens living across the EU whose rights would be completely changed.
Well, that's another question I've got for you, actually. But before I get on to that, just as a subsidiary issue here, which is the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade Agreement, and there's a lot of people don't want to join this, don't want Britain to be a part of it. And I'm fascinated to hear that they're getting on board the Leave EU bandwagon because they think that if Britain is outside the EU, there's less likelihood that American pressure will be so unbearable that they'll have to join. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying. I mean, one of the problems with TTIP is that we don't even know what's in it.
Yeah, sure.
So we're railing against it. I think that there was a major strategic mistake in keeping discussions in the shade because people are automatically suspicious of it. A lot of the things that have been talked about, for example, the inevitable privatisation of the NHS, David Cameron has said he will exempt the NHS from this agreement. But it's not to say I like it. I don't like any secret discussions. I don't think it's democratic. I don't think there's such a thing as a fair free trade agreement. I think a fair trade agreement makes sense, but a free trade agreement usually doesn't. It usually means somebody is going to suffer. So I don't think it's a question of getting out of TTIP and leaving the EU in order to make that happen. It's a question of making TTIP work for us.
Okay, that's an interesting point of view. Przemek, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, actually, I must agree here with Pippa to a point in that this seems to be largely, we as a public are largely kept in the dark. We don't really know much about this, but I would actually compare this to the EU. In fact, what we were signing up to turned out to be something completely different, right? And I've got a feeling that the TTIP potentially could come in with issues. And I used to be in UKIP before. I've returned to Conservatives recently, or almost a year ago actually. But a big concern amongst UKIP was that TTIP would actually lead to things like privatisation of the NHS, etc., etc. Now the unfortunate truth is that we really don't know what's in it. I however, I must admit, I am an Atlanticist, and I'd like to see bigger cooperation between the USA and the UK than what we've got at the moment. I'd also like to see bigger cooperation between the UK and USA and places like Poland or the Baltics or the Visegrad Group.
But hang on. Excuse me, Przemek. Hello.
Let me just finish this thought. So I think that some kind of a free trade agreement with the US would actually be useful for Great Britain, potentially even for the European continent. Mm-hmm. However, I think what we must do now not to repeat the mistakes of the EU, is make sure that we actually stick to the free trade and we make sure that nothing else comes in through the back door. I don't understand why a free trade agreement should be bringing in a privatization of NHS.
Okay,
stuff like this obviously really
just a side issue here that I think perhaps is important. If the UK leaves the EU, then I should imagine that in the course of time other countries will also leave. So within 5 or 10 years, and I'm not a geopolitical expert, just common sense tells me that this thing will probably break up. In which case, you're talking about American involvement in Poland. You're talking about unilateral American involvement in Poland. You're also talking about Poland outside of the UK. I don't understand how you can have your cake and eat it.
No, I was referring to Atlanticism, which is more of a cooperation. I mean, I'm not necessarily, I'm not trying to put any kind of rigid structure around this, right? But I think this is the direction in which I'd like to see things develop. Both economically and from a military perspective. Obviously, there already is NATO in place, so that already kind of keeps all these countries.
Well, yeah, but NATO. Wait a minute. I mean, NATO is also on the card, isn't it? NATO could also easily disappear if you don't have the EU. I mean, okay, NATO came before the EU, but only by a few years. They're very closely connected.
So. Well, in fact, I think the opposite might be true, because if you look at what the EU does, it seems to be trying to take certain prerogatives from NATO. For example, by creating European army, right? So what's the point? Once the EU creates an EU army, then what is the point of NATO other than to link up with the US? You see, so it's more of an issue with the EU encroaching on the NATO space and therefore being more of a threat.
Okay, I'd like to ask Pippa what she thinks of the geopolitical thing, but I just would like to say in passing that one of the reasons why the EU was set up, was it not, was to prevent the split up of Europe. And in a situation once again where we have Germany and France and some of the other European powers competing with each other, not only financially but militarily for territory and influence, we could well be going back there again if we carry on with this movement of fragmentation and not unification. Pippa, your comments, please.
This is why
one of the things which people don't really talk about enough is the fact that we have stopped bombing the living daylights out of each other by being part of the EU. We might be bombing other people, but we're not bombing each other.
Yeah.
And that's a start.
We would like to, perhaps, but we don't. We're polite about it.
I think that the EU has a tremendous achievement, which is completely underrated. So many of the people who lived through the war are now older and retired, and then we've got 2 more generations now who don't remember much about it or don't really know much about it. So I think that's really, really important, and it's top of my list of the achievements of the EU. Now, can I just brush on NATO here? Now, NATO has become quite an aggressive organisation, and I'm not happy about it. It really is about banding together to hurt someone else. NATO behaved very, very badly on the borders of Russia, for example, causing troubles along there. NATO have also banded together to give legitimacy to rather bad strategic manoeuvres in Libya and also in Iraq. Now, it wasn't truly a NATO undertaking, but it was the same countries. So I question the legitimacy of NATO to do the things that they do, and I think that the outrageous fallout of the wars that NATO countries have been involved in it really means that we should be questioning NATO before we question the EU.
Well, I think you're absolutely right.
Can I just ask you a question regarding that statement? Because what you said there, that NATO's been behaving aggressively by staging, what did you say, on the borders of Russia, right? Something. But I'm pretty sure that NATO's been acting. I mean, if it's been doing anything, it has been acting within the borders of its member states. I suspect.
I know, but there's one thing to act to the letter of the law. The other thing is to use the letter of law to create power imbalances and quiet aggression, such as putting strategic missiles on the borders.
Yeah, which in putting it bluntly, pisses Russia off and leads to all sorts of...
Indeed, guaranteed.
Which leads to all sorts
and has caused an immense problem within Ukraine.
Yeah. Okay, let's not get into that too much because we're getting into we're missing the point of the program, which is talking about actually more the EU than the NATO side of it. So I'd like to change subject altogether now, please, and move on to an issue, an aspect of it which I consider to be vitally important, and it's the whole issue of justice and sovereignty. Now, if David Cameron's argument, and I give him credit for logical thinking, is that the EU is ebbing away and is ebbing away our sovereignty. Pippa, do you think it's a bad thing that's happening, or a good thing?
Well, this is a question of governance, really. I mean, I'm speaking from Wales. We have our own governance structures in Wales. There are also government structures in Westminster and structures in the EU. And, we, as people, as individuals, we will each cast our vote. And one of the things we have to be concerned about is which is the right governance structure for the people of our countries. Now, in Wales, we are only partly devolved, and I'm hopeful for the future of Wales under its own structure. We have had, in my view, and in many people's view, an appalling governance at Westminster level, which has been quite overtly punishing disabled and poorer people, whilst quite overtly favouring the richer. That's a bad governance system and bodes ill for the future, because these things do crack always at some point. When it comes to laws, there aren't so many laws actually made in the EU. Between 8 and 10% of British laws derive from Europe. But, they're not imposed by Europe on us. They're agreed by the ministers as part of the Council of European ministers, and agreed by our own MEPs. So, and the kind of laws that have been quite helpful to us, for example, such as a lot of the environmental laws, which I say helpful to us, it does depend who we are, but of course the environment is rather crucial because we do depend on it for life. We've had very poor environmental governance from Westminster.
Okay, just before we get on to environment, I'd like to ask Przemek what you think about that, because you did mention earlier in the programme that one of your big issues with the EU is the bureaucracy. Are you including the legislation side of things in that, or what?
Well, I mean, the way I see this is, what effectively you see, because if you look at the UK, we've had our own laws since centuries and centuries ago, and the way our laws have been created typically have been by organic growth. So the UK law is a lot more responsive to the needs of the citizens, and that's the way that it's been created over the centuries. Now, that makes it practically incompatible with the, let's say, the overall or average European law, because if you actually look on the continent, majority of the continental European law is based off the back of the Napoleonic Code. That was the basis, because Napoleon pretty much conquered most of Europe anyway, and then even the countries which hadn't been conquered, they kind of then adopted this particular type of French law, which is very different because it's kind of imposed from the top, rather than created from the bottom up, right? And for that reason, what we see is basically what we often get is either a clash, or the EU laws pretty much come on top of the UK laws, and they literally just duplicate stuff. And for that reason, I don't really see what kind of value it adds, if any.
Okay.
In fact, it might be detrimental.
Okay.
But yes.
Pippa, I think you have to admit that he's got a point here. I mean, would Wales have more of a chance of devolution under UK if the UK were to leave and it wasn't subject to the European powers from Brussels and the European Court of Justice?
I don't think the European Court of Justice will make that much difference to our devolution package. I mean, Westminster holds the strings.
Yeah, okay.
I think that the difference would be marginal from that point of view, probably not worth arguing about too much. But from Wales's point of view, of course, we'd be a lot poorer because we're a net gain from the EU in terms of finance, mainly because, of course, there's still an awful lot of work to do lifting people out of poverty.
Well,
and,
this is...
Sorry,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is a huge issue, isn't it? I mean, this is probably the biggest thing that nobody's talking about. That if the UK does leave the EU, that means Scotland will. It's like a manna from heaven. It's a gift. It gives the SNP the chance they've been wanting to call another referendum, and they will probably win this time. And that means bang goes your UK. Bang goes your sovereign state. Isn't that rather serious? Przemek.
Well, it is serious, and you have to ask why Scotland is so anxious to break away from the EU. It's because management of the UK, management has been so bad. Our own government has been so bad. I mean, it has really been the upholding of workers' rights from an EU level, which has given us some of the good things that we have in this country. Without that, we face a decline in terms of justice issues.
Przemek, okay, look, you've heard this argument. I mean, I've listened to yours. Just a minute. I've listened to your argument. I'd like to ask you, finally now, I take your point on board. I think very, very interesting points of view, but you're up against a situation that you're almost saying, in fact, I'm rather almost saying, if the UK leaves the EU, that means the UK will break up. Is it worth it? Is it worth it just because we don't like the extra bureaucracy?
I don't think it will.
You don't think it will?
I think it will break up. And I'll tell you why.
You don't live in Glasgow.
No, obviously not. But let me give you two main arguments, right? Because for one, we will most likely, and I mean by majorly most likely, stay in the EEA. So in fact, nothing really will change. I mean, the main difference will be that we will save a lot of money, and that we currently contribute in net costs of the EU to the EU, and we never see again. We will be able to then spend this money internally. For example, in Scotland, right? And secondly, when SNP was flying very high and making various promises, the estimates of the North Sea oil, which was what a lot of the SNP kind of hypothetical future GDP of Scotland was being derived from. But by now, if you look at it, the oil resources in the North Sea, they've actually been estimated as much lower than what they were like 2 or 3 years ago, and that definitely doesn't give a lot of hope for the hypothetical.
Let me just counter
after Scotland vote.
A counter argument for that would be that makes it even more likely that the Scots will vote to stay in the EU, will want to stay in the EU and leave the UK if the UK leaves the EU, because they need the EU support.
Absolutely.
Why? But to be another forgotten region of the EU. But there are many forgotten regions of the EU. I mean, look around. Look around.
Pippa, you want to say something here? Pippa?
Yes, I'd like to chip in, because one thing we did ask for, and so did Scotland, was that the ballot, the EU referendum ballot, was accounted for separately in England, Scotland and Wales, so we could see the way our people voted. And that has been denied to us, which I think is rather sad and rather points to the way that both Scotland and Wales would vote to remain in the EU, even if England voted out. Now, this will be a bone of contention for the future. If the ultimate vote is to leave the EU, then obviously Nicola Sturgeon, who doesn't like being messed with, will go for another vote to break Scotland away from England, and it will strengthen the Welsh hand of the nationalists as well, and the Green hand too, because we do believe that in a true democracy, the power should be in the hands of people at the lowest practical level. So It's going to be a bit of a mess, I think, whatever the outcome. I can see it playing out in lots of different ways. But I agree with you, John, that the Scottish Hand will be strengthened and they are likely to win their next vote for independence.
OK, let's wrap up the programme now. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and we talked about 10% of the issues that I had on my plan to talk about. But don't worry, because next week we're going to have another programme on Britain leaving the EU, and we will keep on having these programmes until we finish this whole subject. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today, Przemek Skrzynski, a voluntary researcher for Vote Leave. And thank you very much indeed, Pippa Bartolotti, the head of the Green organisation in Wales. Thank you, listeners, for being with us today. Tune in again next week. Goodbye.